So welcome everyone. This is the Atticus Advantage Gross Essentials webinar series. And today we're going to talk about one of our favorite subjects, and I hope it's one of yours, massively increasing your law firm's profitability, and from our perspective, your cash flow. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mark Powers. I'm the president of Atticus, and I've been working, and Atticus has been working with law firms for over 30 years, and that's all we've ever worked with. That's our entire focus. On the call with us is Shawn McNalis. Shawn is one of the shareholders at Atticus. She's the director of curriculum. She trains every single practice advisor and certifies them with Atticus. She's also co-authored the three first books, Time Management for Attorneys, How Good Attorneys Become Great Rainmakers, Hire Slow, Fire Fast, which is a great book if you're having any staff issues, especially if you don't even read it and put it on the desk sometimes, it helps. And then we just released Cash Flow and Profitability, what law firms didn't teach you about running a successful law firm. So Shawn, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
So Shawn, I'm going to take everyone through the logistics first.
Okay.
Before we get going, and how to get the most out of this webinar. As soon as I click through. Come on, baby, you can do it. So this is going to be interactive in the sense that we are going to, it's clicking a lot. So you're going to want to take lots of notes. We're going to go through some concepts that are financial in nature, which is not always everyone's favorite subject. It's not always our easiest subject. It's no accident that you went into law and not finance for a lot of us. So keep a paper and pencil handy. You're going to take lots of notes. And if we discuss something along the way, if Shawn and I are discussing something and you want more information or need something, do me a favor. Go ahead and write down this email address, grow@atticusadvantage.com. That can save you a lot of headaches later on. So go ahead and write that down. If you've got other software open, email, web, Facebook, a document to edit, I would close it because this is going to take your full attention, full focus. It's not every day you get this kind of time to discuss and work on your finances. So the intention of our webinar today is to prepare you to be as profitable and financially healthy as possible in 2021. We're going to go through the levers that control your profit, and we're going to discuss some tools and strategies to immediately increase the profit, to get things happening right away. And at the end, we'll have those suggestions for you, plus some questions and answer. Shawn, anything you want to talk about before I jump in?
I'd love for everyone to think about taking away one strategy that they can apply after they leave this webinar that can really dramatically increase their revenues. And I think they'll be surprised at the variety of steps that they can take that are actually fairly easy.
Okay, good, Shawn. By the way, I know some of you on this call are new to Atticus. You've never heard of us. Quick background, we're founded in 1989, and our whole mission is to help great attorneys build great law firms, great practices, in the hopes that you would have a great life out of that as well. So it's the things that we're focused on is making sure your gross revenues, personal incomes are going up. We're reducing stress, reducing the number of hours that you're working, making sure you have plenty of satisfaction and more time with your family. We tend to work with solo and small firm attorneys, but we also work with managing partners and leaders in the firm. We work with associations in partnerships like Wealth Council, Elder Council, Illinois State Bar Association, and other bar associations. And we can often take a firm from the beginning of startup all the way to succession and exit. A lot of this done like through webinars like we're doing today. And by the way, if you like today's webinar, there is a way to subscribe to it. Either we'll mention that at the end or email that address. We talked about that email address. We do workshops. One that I'm a big fan of is Double Your Revenue, and there'll be one in April if you can get into that one. And coaching programs. We also have a couple of services called My Great Team, Build My Great Team, which helps you actually find and recruit the right talent you need for your firm, along with the books that we mentioned earlier. So Shawn, let's jump into profitability.
Okay, that's good. There's
a great quote that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. And that's truly the way we feel. And we think that there's an underlying premise or an assumption that you should know about your firm. Your law firm, your business devours cash. And by the way, you can put other things in there as well, because I will substitute that from time to time. Your law firm will devour cash, it will devour energy, it will devour your time, it will devour your focus without proper boundaries, controls, and constraints. And that's especially so when we talk about getting you your dividends and your profits. It will devour everything in the attempt to get that. So if we're not, the other thing that I want to point out, Shawn, for everyone, that profit is not something that happens at the end of the year. It's a series of habits and skills that you're developing all the way along the line and implementing them. And if you're sticking to small steps, winnable steps along the way, you're going to be far more profitable. So Shawn, do you want to talk about what profit is for a firm? What's a healthy profit?
So we would say between 30 and 35%. That's the standard for service-based businesses. Now, we have plenty of clients that exceed that in profitability, but that doesn't happen overnight, and that is largely by design. So anyway, 30, 35%, if you're under that profit number now, really listen for ways in which to increase your number.
So Shawn, one of the things you have there might be interesting to people. It says above and beyond shareholder compensation.
Right. Yeah, so we want the shareholders to take out distributions. We don't want them to be technicians. We'll say a little bit more about this in the slides to come. There's something called the great lawyer theory, and we'll get into that as we go along.
Yeah, so listen, when Shawn is talking about your profit margins, she's saying it's above and beyond whatever you take out as salary for your substantive work. So you'll get paid for as a productive substantive lawyer, as a shareholder that does that, or for your managerial work. We're talking 30 to 35% above that. And a lot of partners get confused about that, a lot of shareholders. So Shawn mentioned the great lawyer mindset. Now I talk about that. So I won't go into depth here, but if you're working with Atticus or you're working with a coach, they've probably talked about this. And there's a mindset within the legal community. As a matter of fact, 80% of your competitors have this mindset. And they tend to think that my whole role here is just to do great work, which is important. You've got to do that, right? But great work and working really hard will win the day. It won't, not anymore. You've got to do great work, yes, but you've got to evolve beyond that. And the next mindset is practice growth mindset. But in this particular mindset, write this formula down. This is how the great lawyer mindset, again, 80% of your peers think about profit. They take revenues, they subtract expenses, and what's left over is profit. So if you're like most law firms, at the end of the day, if you follow this model, there's very little profits that are available. You're left with the scraps on the plate, leftovers. So the evolution of this in the thinking, so the mindset is a paradigm, a way of thinking, is the practice growth mindset. And they shift this formula around. They think very differently about profit. Their formula is this: revenues minus profit equals expenses. So think about that for a second. I take my gross revenues, and along the way, I've subtracted profit at some margin. Now, maybe I'm not at 30, 35%. Maybe I'm only at 5%, 10%. But I've set up a profit account, and every month I take out a certain amount of gross, and I set it aside for that profit account because that's my paycheck as shareholder. Now, what does that do? That puts a constraint on expenses, which means I have to now be forced to make tough decisions about my expenses. If there's no constraint,
would you say this is almost like budgeting for your profit, like throughout the year, putting a small amount of your revenues aside, almost like a budgeted item?
Yeah, it is. But the big thing that I want you all to get, that if there isn't a constraint to push back on expenses, the expenses will devour your profit. So this formula is very, very important. This formula alone can change your life when it comes to profitability. So Shawn, let's go through the rules of profitability. Now, the rules are an acronym, and you'll want the letters all stand for something. So write these down. You got a pen, paper, make sure you're writing them down. The R in rules of profitability stands for rate and realization. So it's a double duty. That R does rates and realization. So rates are the hourly or flat fee you charge the client. And this will be a little bit different when we talk about contingency practice. Realization is the collected fee against the billed fee. Shawn, anything you want to say about that?
This is one of the most important. So what the rules acronym points to, these are the levers to creating profitability in your firm. It's literally the recipe. And the first three letters in this acronym are the most powerful levers in this formula. So we'll demonstrate in a moment how important your rates are, and then follow closely behind how much you collect. It seems obvious, but we're going to dive deeply into this in a minute. It's really an important lever.
Yeah, so listen, if you're missing this and you have the book, the Cash Flow and Profitability book, Cash Flow and Profitability book, it goes into this. But if you don't understand the levers that Shawn's talking about and have the distinction of what the levers mean and how to use them, it's going to be hard for you to drive profitability. So these are the levers that are going to push profitability. So write them down. We're going to revisit them, but we want you to understand what all 5 of them are. Rates, realization. The U stands for utilization. So it's billed hours divided by the hours worked. And we'll talk about all of these in more detail, but just know it stands for utilization. The L stands for leverage, the number of timekeepers per partner. So that could also be per associate, as long as the associates are delegating or any other.
That can also be the number of revenue producers per partner in say a contingency firm. So it doesn't just have to be billers, it can be revenue producers.
Yeah, so we're talking about profitability in both a billable practice and a contingency practice. And so we'll be making those distinctions along the way. The E in the rule stands for expenses, which are facilities, support, staff, equipment, insurance, taxes. We'll talk about the margins. And then speed, elapsed time of billing and collection. And we would also include in that speed of time on the desk is another way of looking at that. So Shawn and I are going to visit each one of these rules one at a time. And then you can see how they apply to you. So Shawn, the first one we said was rates and realization. Rates are what you charge. And as a contingency practice, you do have a similar rate. We'll talk about that. Realization is the cash received as a percentage of recorded billed time. So what we're going to do is run you through some firm statistics as an example. So we're going to give you some stats that are not your firm, right? And it's for a billable practice first. But write these down because you'll have questions like, Shawn, where did you get that number? Mark, where did you get that number? So the attorney is working 55 hours a week. They're billing 30 hours a week. Again, this is a billable practice example. Their billable rate is $300, and they have an 85% realization rate. So again, if they bill $100, if their realization is 85, they've collected $85. So these are Shawn and I are going to give you some applications of rates and realization. You're just going to have to put them against these numbers. And we'll run you through the numbers. Don't get too worried about them. So under those conditions, an attorney billing 30 hours a week at $300 an hour, they're going to bill on a average year, and I think we're billing around 1480 here, I think, Shawn, hours a year. They're going to bill $432,000. Their collections, because they have an 85% realization rate, is going to be $367,000. Again, they billed $432,000, but they're only collecting 85% of that, so that's your realization. They have expenses, so we're giving you this. We don't want to get into an argument of whether they're right expenses right now, but we want you to see the power of rates and realization as a lever. We're giving you some stats. And so this is salary, small office, maybe a key assistant or legal secretary. And what they're netting, in this case, it's netting after we give them a salary, and it's not a very high salary, but they're netting $124,000 for distribution. Shawn, are you okay with that as a starting point?
Yeah.
Anything you want to say about this?
Just that during the course of this explanation, we use realizations and collections almost interchangeably in case that's confusing to anyone.
Yes. So we're going to show you the impact of rate first. So a small increase in rate. So what was the rate that this attorney was billing out at? Do you remember? It was $300 an hour. So we're going to show you just a small impact of that. So if they're billing $300 an hour at 1,440 hours a year, we said they're going to get $432,000. If we increase that by $25, they're going to get $468. So if we increase, let me just ask you a question to think about. If you're in a billable practice, and for new clients, if you went up $25 an hour, how many clients do you think you would lose on intake? Probably very few. I would say none. And even for past clients, if you went up with that, it would be a very small number that would be upset. But it's the impact it has right away is pretty dramatic. If we went up $50 an hour, if we went up $75 an hour, you see the difference. Now, we're going to show you this as it relates to the rest of the firm, but a small increase in rate has a dramatic difference. Shawn, do you want to say anything about this before I go into the impact that these two have?
No, let's take a look at the compounding effect when you increase rates and you increase your realization. I think that really tells the story.
Yeah, so Shawn and I would argue that, and we'll go into this in a minute, that client selection is going to be a pretty important part of your profitability. But if you go up in your rates, again, we'll come back to contingency, but in a billable practice, if you go up in your rates, we're going to assert you're going to get a better level of client. You'll start weeding out what we would call C and D level clients, and you would have more A and B level clients. And in our experience, what that does is increases your collection. So here's what might happen with a $25 increase. So stay with us. At $300 an hour, we were billing $432,000. We went up $25, it went up to $468 because we went up $25 an hour. We really didn't lose many clients or incoming clients. The collection in the past, when it was $300 an hour, was 85%. You're going to take a few actions that we're going to recommend, and we're going to raise you up to 90% realization, which is a fear. We would expect you to get closer to 95% in a well-run firm, but we're going to raise you, and that's going to mean you're going to collect $421. Now, what happened to your expenses? Did they change when you raised rates? They didn't. But what did happen is your net went up roughly $54,000. Now, the only thing you did different here is what? What was the only thing you really did in this model to get an extra $54,000 at the end of the year? You went up $25 an hour. That's a pretty dramatic impact in your rates. Shawn, we're going to talk about how to determine the hourly rate, but is there anything you want to say about this compounding effect?
This is low-hanging fruit. When you're talking about generating more profit, I would encourage everyone to review their marketplace and kind of study what the going rates are right now and see where you land in the hierarchy of your marketplace. Ask yourself, when is the last time I raised my rates? For many of you, it's been years. So I'd encourage you, it's the beginning of the year right now, it's a good time to potentially raise your rates. And we would encourage you to do so. Now, the least stressful way to raise rates is just to raise them with new clients. You won't get pushback from existing clients that are annoyed that you're doing this. You just raise it with any new client inquiries that you have. And as far as how much you should raise the rates, this is something you're going to have to determine, for yourself. Ask yourself, how many years has it been since I raised rates? Who's the highest in the marketplace right now? How many notches below their rate do I need to be? Try to place yourself in the marketplace and give yourself a raise in 2021. As Mark said, if you're only raising your fees $25, you're not going to get, it's not a huge difference in the minds of the consumer, especially if these are referred clients. It's not going to make a huge difference. Beyond that, you'll start to see a little bit of pushback, but it will have the effect of refining your client base. And you'll find that the people that you end up working with, are really the better clients to begin with.
So I will also say on that note that a lot of those of you that are currently Atticus clients know that you're probably your coach or your resource assistant may even do this, but push you to move it up to the level of demand. And what we mean by that is you're providing great value. You go up 25, 50, 75 until there's pushback, until people stop accepting it and start declining. And that's when you know where you're at. Sometimes you don't even have to look at other people's rates. Of course, we're always being concerned about the courts and we have to be reasonable there. But there's a level of demand that allows you to increase your rates until you get pushback. Shawn, I'm going to move on and take a look at the rates and realization as they apply to a contingency practice. So it's a little bit different, right? Because we don't have billable hours, but you do have an average dollar per matter, per file, per case, right? So if you took all of your files for the year and say that you are a small firm and you had 86 files, this is a tiny, tiny firm, and they had 5,000 average fee, or they took the 430,000 divided by 86, their average fee is 5,000. Now, that's determined by the level of file that they will let in and the level of complexity, and we'll show you how to discern those. But what we would argue in a contingency practice is you want to raise the average value per file. So we can raise that from 5 to 650 or 1,500 per file. And in contingency practice, that's not the hardest thing to do. If you do that, for every, by the way, Shawn and I would argue that really well-run contingency practices, really well-run ones, will raise their average fees on a regular basis, 10, 20% easily. But go from 5 to 6,500, it's going to yield almost 130,000 more in profit. So if the revenue was 430, same number of files, we haven't added we haven't added more files to the pipeline. We just increased the average fee, and it generated 559,000 in revenue. Expenses are exactly the same, and the net goes up from 187,000 to 316,000. So that's quite dramatic. And so for contingency practice, what's going to make the biggest difference is raising the average dollar per file that you accept into the pipeline. So that means raising the criteria. Shawn, do you want to talk about the intake matrix?
Yeah, so we've developed an intake matrix to help you be more selective when it comes to clients. And this is just kind of a close-up look at the top of the form here to give you an idea of how we're doing this. What we've done is take all the criteria you're using kind of mentally. Many of you, if you don't have it written down, and we've made a matrix. Down the left-hand side, we have A, B, C, and farther down, D clients. Across the top are all the criteria that you would look for to determine if this is going to be an A or B client. And by putting all of your knowledge and the red flags you've experienced into one form like this, we can kind of give you a system for client intake that will help you level up your client base so that your average fee per file will keep going up in the way Mark was just talking. So you know, C&D clients, you start taking fewer and fewer C&D clients, plus get those C&D clients out of your practice sooner, and you'll start to see a leveling up and an increase in the average fee per file.
Very good. That's perfect, Shawn. So really what we want to do is be more selective with our clients, whether it's a billable or a contingency practice. This is sort of like a intake scorecard. And if you're already an Atticus client, you have one of these for your practice. So just ask your coach. There is a intake matrix for almost every billable practice, personal injury, family law, estate planning. So if you already are in a program, you can get one for yourself. So what Shawn's saying is we're going to be far more selective, focus on A and B clients. So the lever number two, if you remember the rules, RU, was utilization. So utilization, Shawn, do you want to talk about this?
You know, to me, this is one of the most under-tracked and underutilized, if I could say, metrics. So here we're looking at, because this seems invisible to many people, so here we're looking at the percentage of time that a revenue producer, say an associate or a billing staff person, we're looking at the percentage of time that they're in the office compared to the amount of time they spend on, you know, billing or revenue producing tasks. So for most of you, you look out into your office, everybody looks pretty busy, but in reality, people are only capturing and recording about 31% of their time. And that's true even for a PI firm where they're not necessarily billing their time, but they may not be spending their time in revenue production. So it's almost invisible and nobody tracks this. And Mark, if you'll go to the next slide, we can see some of the power of this.
Do you want this or do you want the graphs?
Let's look at the graphs. So this is kind of what we're talking about. Let's say you have a revenue producer in the office for 8 hours, right? They bill for 4 of those hours. They've, they're trying hard. They're billing about 4 hours. Then if you're collecting only 75%, you collect on about 3 of those hours. So this is a stunning diminishment of their revenue production ability. I mean, they're in the office for 8 hours. That if they captured 6 or 7 of those as billable or revenue production time, and if their collection rate was higher, you'd be using the same amount of people and producing dramatically more revenue. So let's look at our friend, the low utilization attorney. Now, I'm calling it low utilization. This is actually the national average in billable firms. People are only capturing 31% of their time in the office and using it for production. And why is that? They're doing administrative things. Perhaps their partner has them loaded up with all kinds of admin stuff that is not revenue producing, but that the partner perhaps doesn't want to do. It's your job as the partner to maximize what your billers and revenue producers could do. So if you have the same amount of time, you've got our friend, the high utilization attorney, he's using 75% of his day. Look what he's billing. He's billing $364,000 a year compared to our low utilization attorney at $150,000 a year. This is a dramatic difference. They both have 8 hours a day available to them. And look what one is producing at 31% compared to 75%. People are not tracking this. And it's really an important metric to pay attention to, Mark.
Especially if you want profitability. And also remember, on the expense side, you're still paying for those 8 hours no matter what. Your return on it is either going to be a low return or a higher return. And it really just takes monitoring what people are doing and whether they're meeting production standards. Shawn, let's talk about leverage.
Okay. So here we want to talk about the ratio of people that every partner can delegate to. So for every partner, you want to have a number of associates. Depending on the type of firm that you are, you'll either have a rank of associates, paralegals, and legal assistants below you, or if you don't need a lot of associates and delegate directly to a practice, a forms-driven practice that can use a lot of paralegals as opposed to associates, which is a very profitable way to design a firm. That's leveraging in action. When I see firms where the partners are doing most of the work and they have a small, very small number of people below them that they can delegate to, I say that firm is upside down. You really want to have a pyramid-shaped firm, small number of partners at the top, and a lot of people that you can delegate to. And here's why. Let's imagine there's a lawyer out there and he's doing some pretty complex work. And that complex work requires 40 hours per file. Automatically, that limits him to about 37 files a year. Let's say we flip the ratio now, and he decides he can delegate a lot more of the work inside that file to a paralegal or a legal assistant at a lower hourly rate. Now, all of a sudden, his capacity opens up. He can handle his personal pipeline, means he can handle 93 files a year by reducing the amount of time he spends on the file and increasing the amount of time that the people he delegates to can spend on the file.
So
go ahead.
Can I jump in?
Please.
So this is often confusing for people. But we're saying that they do have competent people they're delegating to. Most firms that Shawn or I will look into, the attorney is too heroic. They're doing too much substantive work. They don't think anyone could do it as good as they do, and they're not delegating to competent people. Now, either that or they haven't hired the competent people yet. But if they delegate, let's just watch how this plays out. In this first high attorney, no leverage, with low utilization of staff, the attorney's putting 40 hours into the file, where the paralegal or legal assistant or even associates putting 16 per hours into the file. In the high leverage, the attorney is supervising, monitoring, setting standards, watching the files, coaching, dealing with client on issues, and they're doing 16 hours. The staff is working, paralegals, associates are working 48 hours on that file. So what that translates in, the total number of files that the low leveraged attorney can do, which means a lot of attorney hours, can do 37 files, and here they can do 93 files. And what that ultimately means is the low leverage is going to generate 261. The high leverage is going to generate 570,000. So you're going to say, yeah, but my expenses went up. They did, not by that much. Yeah, but my billable hour on the staff went down to the client. They did. But the overall value of that file that came into the firm went up. You're doing 4 hours.
The entire inventory at the end of the year, the value of that entire inventory was, substantially increased. So it's sort of like, you took a very narrow pipeline and you really expanded it, and you were able to produce much more revenue with this sort of leveraged operation than you were with an attorney who holds on to the work. It's said that in most practices, attorneys are overqualified for 80% of the work in any given case or file. And paralegals, even, associates can take on much of what the supervising attorney is doing, and that frees him or her up to work on other files and also to market and manage the firm.
So Shawn, just as reference for everyone, we're going to try to move through. I know this is a lot that we're driving you through, and sometimes it's a new subject for some of you. Shawn, we're going to go for about another 10 or 15 minutes so that we can leave a little time for questions if possible.
Okay.
I'm going to move through. These are just some of the things you could do on getting your leverage to move along, right? Shawn, do you want to say anything about these, or?
The attorney that decides to delegate needs to learn some executive skills, needs to have weekly case status meetings. It helps him or her keep the files moving along, giving out instruction and detailed direction to the people on their team. It's a great way to keep everything going, keep an eye on things, to make sure that the client is still getting the same high-level service.
Ultimately, work needs to be pushed down to the lowest level. Now, I should underline that word, competent staff. We're not saying leverage down to incompetent people. This is when you're working on the firm, we have to raise the level of your talent, because you won't delegate if you don't do that. But work is pushed down to the lowest level of competent staff or team members, as long as you're compensated at a profit for that revenue producer's work. And usually, Shawn and I like to think of the rule of three, and it's a simple rule, but revenues generated by a legal assistant must equal 3 times the assistant's salary. So if we're paying them $150,000, I know that's more than you're paying them. The first portion covers salary, $50,000. The second portion covers, I'm sorry, if we're, help me if I don't mess this up, Shawn. If we're paying, I'm sorry, Shawn, I got it. If we're paying them $50 an hour as salary, then we have to add $50 for overhead and benefits and $50 for profit. So you have to bill them out at $150 minimum. That's the rule of three.
And I think of it, so this goes to all revenue producers. They need to generate 3 times their salary in order to be profitable. There's where you get your built-in 30% profit if you pay attention to that ratio. It's a really important one.
So the last 2 letters you saw in the acronym for rules was E and S, expenses and speed. So we're going to give you a quick rule of thumb, and a lot of people ask about this for expenses, and the rule of thumb around budgeting. And you can, again, it's going to depend a little bit on the firm, but typically
just guidelines that you can use.
Pardon me, Shawn?
These are just guidelines that people can use when putting together their budget.
Okay, do you want to talk about them, Shawn?
Yeah, we like to have you keep your people expenses between 38 and 42%, just like it says. This is including the benefits. Facilities, 68%, covers everything that you see here. Equipment, 3 to 5%. Your marketing expenses, we say here 4 to 7 expense. That's going to differ dramatically. A PI firm is going to have more expensive marketing expenses typically, and say a family law or an estate planning firm who, of course, don't advertise their expenses in marketing are going to be lower. Miscellaneous 3 to 5%. And that we put these out as general guidelines for people when they're trying to put together a budget for the very first time. Now, in the book, we actually have a more elaborate budget discussion, as well as you would have access to a Excel spreadsheet that actually has a law firm budget laid out in it already.
The only other thing I'd say about expenses is this is the stuff of profit. And what I mean by that, we're not trying to get you to keep cutting expenses, but we want your expenses to remain healthy. In a lot of firms, we see salaries and bonuses and facility expenses get out of whack because there's no constraint on it. There's no either a budget or there's nothing pushing back, like we're taking money out for profit and we can't spend it on these things, so we have to make better decisions. Most firms are not forced to make tough decisions unless they come into a crisis, and they're never budgeting or working towards profit. So that's expenses, which is fairly straightforward, and quite frankly, speed is quite straightforward either. It's either time on desk, so when I open a file to when I close the file, meaning I've collected the money. So if it's a contingency practice, not when I settled it, it's when the money comes in. So time on desk, and we want to reduce that over time while still providing the value to the client. For a billing practice, it's how long it takes us to get the invoice to the client. The longer it takes, the harder it will be for you to collect and get paid. And for litigation practice, it's often not so much invoice here, but how quickly you get to demand and how quickly you can get to settlement. And then how long it takes you between either getting the invoice out there and getting paid or getting the settlement and getting paid. Those are numbers and metrics that you'll need to look at. We're not going to go into all of those here. It would take too long, but you would want to go into them. But there is a concept of value corrosion. It happens in all practices, contingent or billable. Shawn, do you want to talk through this?
Yeah, so this little graph shows you that your client most values your work when you're actually solving their problem. So they come into you, they're in pain, you start to solve the problem for them, they're excited, a little less excited by the time you get to capturing and recording your time. If you have a lagging billing system, they're less excited by the time they get the bill. By the time you get around to collecting that, if it's a long time away from when you actually started to do the work, the value in the mind of the client is really diminished. It follows what we call the gratitude curve. On the day that you get the big win, clients are just ecstatic. They think you're fantastic. 3 weeks later, you come down a couple of notches. He's a pretty good lawyer. 6 weeks later, hey, it was cut and dried. I could have done it by myself. 10 weeks later, he's crazy. I'm not going to pay that bill. So, 3 months later, the SOB is threatening, I'll sue him, I'm filing a complaint. So a little exaggerated, but this is kind of the diminishment of gratitude that happens in the mind of the client. So the message here is collect up front as much as you can, bill quickly. It's how you will collect what you are owed. It's
and even in contingency,
it's how you raise your realization rate.
Yeah, by the way, it's the same thing in contingency. If you settle the file and it takes you a lot more time to collect the money, it's where your client's going to get upset. So let's go through a couple of tools that we could recommend for you, and some we're going to provide here. One of the things that we always recommend our clients do when it comes to profitability and cash flow, and quite frankly, we've only been able to scrape the surface here in this call. It's not long enough, right? But there's something we call a dashboard, like you have in your car dashboard that tells you how fast you're going, how much gas you have, how much oil you have, whether it's overheated. We want a financial dashboard for the organization that tracks the various metrics that are important to you. A sample of that might look like this. You're right. Go ahead, Shawn. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Mark, we have, there's over 20 forms that are available in the book and online. We've actually posted in the chat box today, this form is available for download. You can download it right now. We have Dashboard B, which is for billable firms, and then Dashboard C, that is good for contingency firms. So you can download those right now and get a feel for what it would be like to have all of your financial indicators in one easy to read location. It's like an executive summary for your key indicators, and it really helps you organize your thinking around your billing. It shows you the productivity of your each attorney in a billing practice. It has a place for marketing stats. Marketing, we believe, is the fuel to the car that you're driving, and it really predicts future cash flow. So we always want to carry marketing on these forms. But this is a way for you to get on one sheet all of your financial indicators. We recommend you give this to your bookkeeper, and you and she meet on this once a month.
So you can either, you can download these. If, again, you're already inside of Atticus, you can talk to a coach, or if you're not, you can get the book, and the book explains it in more detail. So I want to go through a couple of suggested actions, and then we'll go through some question and answer if we can. Hopefully we'll have a little time for that. Also, I have a little something for you in addition to the dashboard samples. I've got something else that may be helpful. First suggestion is read the cash flow and profitability book. You can go to the Atticus website, atticusadvantage.com, and you can go to the products and you'll find the book selection and order that. You can also get the time management book, the staffing book, and the time management book. But I would read that in the first quarter. I would start upgrading your billing rates and your average fee rates, or your average value per file in a contingency practice right away. I would establish some production standards. If we want good utilization, we want to establish we have daily, weekly, monthly, annual production standards that people at a minimum have to do, and then there's bonus for hitting certain ones, and that goes into a little bit more. The other thing I would do first thing this year is set up a basic profit account. So it's a separate account that you move money to every month out of your operating account that's reserved for profit. And at the end of the quarter, take half of that out and distribute it, and leave the other half there in case they still need it, but you probably won't. That's a great feeling to see that. You want to start creating a habit of winning with profit very early on in the year. That's why we want you to take money out early. Also, I said I've got something else. This is a special offer. For those of you that are interested in finding out more about Atticus, or if you're interested in your development as a great practice builder, you want to have a great practice, you want to have a great practice growth mindset, there is a practice growth diagnostic. If you order that and do it within 2 weeks, we'll mail you a copy of the cash flow book at no expense. So that'll be part of the diagnostic. If you're not familiar with the diagnostic, it really goes through a behavioral assessment, because sometimes you're getting in the way of your practice. It does an assessment of your cash flow, your profitability, your time management, your staffing. So it goes through the firm's foundations. And then we do a growth analysis with you, and then go through the 3 most impactful actions. So you'll have a dedicated conversation. It's going to cost, if you do that, it's going to cost $295. Includes all of the things we talked about, and we'll spend a good amount of time with you going through your practice. You don't have to do that. I would recommend it. It's really one of the most powerful things you can do. And if you do it and say, boy, that Mark was full of baloney, we have a guarantee on everything we do, 100%. So if you're saying it wasn't of the value, let us know and we won't charge you for it. But you'll always find these of value. So you can find this, you can email grow@atticusadvantage.com, and you can get set up one, or just put something in the chat. The other place you can get started, if you go to the website, right at the very top of the website, it says, how do I get started? Get started there. It'll sign you up for a diagnostic. Okay, gang. Mike, what I'd like to do is, if we have a few minutes, open it up for some questions, if possible. So do you want to tell Mike, do you want to walk him through doing the questions?
Yes, thanks, Mark. You can use the chat function on your GoToWebinar dashboard to send a question to me, the event organizer. If you'd like that question to remain anonymous, please indicate so in your message. That way we don't mention your name. You can also click the hand icon on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we'll call on you and we'll unmute you at that time so that you can be heard by the entire group. Mark, currently we only had one question that had been typed in earlier. Someone wanted to know if there were other intake matrices that we had for non-personal injury cases. We do happen to have like a family law version and a general practice version as well. If that's something you're interested in, you can email grow@atticusadvantage.com. We'll be happy to send one to you and happy to speak with you about how to use that.
So Shawn and I will give you a minute because I know we went through a great deal of information here. So I'll give you a minute if you want to ask a question, but otherwise, I would highly recommend, I don't say this just because we wrote it, but I would highly recommend the book. It makes an enormous difference in understanding these issues. Second, the diagnostic is one of the most valuable things, the practice growth diagnostic. I would do that. It's simple, it's not expensive, and it gives you an enormous amount of feedback. Mike, and that's accurate, just they can go to grow@atticusadvantage.com?
Yes. We do have one other question that was typed in. On the proposed budget items for expenses, they don't add up to a 100%. Is the remaining percentage supposed to be profit?
Yes. That's accurate.
Okay.
Now, those are rules of thumb. We want to tighten those. We're not trying to cut them out. They're very important, but we're trying to get sharper at where we're spending our money. And the only way you can do that is put some constraints. The real constraint is a budget, and the budget makes allowance for profit. The better way to do it is take the profit out so you don't have the money, and it forces you to make a decision on the expenses.
Okay. There are no other questions that have been sent in or any hands raised.
Okay. So, Mike, we are good. Thank you, everyone. We're grateful that you took the time to listen to this. I hope it made a difference for you. Shawn, really great. And you've done Shawn has done some brilliant work, not only on the cash flow and profitability book, but just in training and developing extraordinary practice advisors. So great work, Shawn.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.